This happened back in 2020. I was driving home after a late evening shift, and it must have been around 2 a.m. by the time I got onto the interstate. This highway is notorious for accidents, as it winds through a desolate desert area with several treacherous bends. In that region, about 45 minutes from my house, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, bright and aggressive. They seemed to materialize out of thin air, and I could barely make out the car behind them. I figured it was just some late-night driver in a hurry, but instead of passing, they started tailgating me closely. A surge of annoyance shot through me. I tapped the brakes, signaling for them to back off, but they responded by flashing their lights. My annoyance turned to unease. There was something menacing about their driving. I accelerated, trying to put some distance between us, hoping they'd leave me alone, but they sped up after me and aggressively overtook me. A while later, I continued driving home, and about 15 minutes later, a figure appeared on the side of the road, a young man standing alone in the dark. He was waving his arms, trying to flag someone down. I pulled up beside him, rolled the window down, and asked him what was wrong. He was pale and had a panicked look in his eyes. He kept glancing over his shoulder as if anticipating someone to come charging out of the desert. He said his car had broken down a little ways up the road, and he needed a ride to the nearest town. I agreed to give him a lift, and he got in. As we began driving, he remained quiet, his fingers tapping nervously on his thigh. I tried making small talk, asking about his car, but he just nodded or shook his head. He mentioned that his phone was dead, and he had been waiting for quite some time. Something about his story didn't sit right with me, but I was already taking him to town. That's when I saw it up ahead, the silhouette of a vehicle on the side of the road. His car, I presumed, except as we got closer, I recognized it. It was the same car that had been following me, now parked and abandoned. A shiver ran down my spine. "Is that your car?" I asked. He didn't answer, just stared straight ahead. I drove past his car, trying to keep my composure, but my mind was racing. This had to be connected. Was this some sort of setup? Was someone else out there? I began feeling more and more disturbed. We reached the outskirts of town when he suddenly spoke up and told me to stop and let him out here. I pulled over to the side of the road, not keen on prolonging this any further. He got out, but before he closed the door, he turned and gave me this look, one that I can't quite describe. It wasn't gratitude. It was more like he was assessing me, memorizing me. He disappeared into the shadows of the town, and I sat there for a moment, my heart trying to break free from my chest. I decided not to stick around. I drove home faster than I probably should have, checking my mirrors the whole way, half expecting to see him, that car, or God knows what else. I didn't sleep that night. The more I thought about it, the less anything made sense. His car was fine, clearly. So what was his game? Who was he waiting for? Was I just a random pawn in some messed up plan? I reported the incident to the local police the next day, but nothing ever came of it. No reports of stolen vehicles, no missing persons fitting his description. It was as if the night itself swallowed him up. It's been a while since that night, but I still can't shake the feeling of those headlights in my mirror, the way he looked at me, and the chilling possibility of what might have happened if I hadn't driven past his car. Hey there, if you enjoy our content and want to stay updated with our latest videos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. And while you're at it, click on the bell icon next to it to receive notifications every time we upload new content. Thanks for being part of our awesome community. I'm originally from Texas, but have spent most of my life in Arizona. Every now and then, my family and I head back to our desert retreat to check on the place and enjoy the tranquility and whatnot. I do love going there, revisiting my old home, but after what happened last time, I think I'll stay in the Grand Canyon state for a while. What I'm about to tell you may keep me from ever going back to that house again. This happened when I was 19, back in August of 2021, roughly a year ago. My family and I were heading up to the house in Arizona for a family gathering the first week after August. I was reluctant about going at first, but it had been a few years since I last visited home. Plus, the chance to take a full week off from work sealed the deal for me. We left on a scorching hot Monday morning. The 8-hour drive was grueling due to the desert heat, and my dad's patience was wearing thin. Once we reached the house, it was around 8 p.m. and already dark. After bringing all our belongings inside and settling in, we turned on the utilities, including the water, and all the usual amenities. My grandparents joined us shortly after, and we helped them get settled too. My mom started preparing dinner while my sister Jane and I were about to head outside to explore the desert surroundings. But that's when my grandpa intercepted us. "Where do you two think you're going?" he said. "We were planning to take a short walk around the desert until dinner's ready," I replied. He gave me a concerned look. "I wouldn't advise that if I were you. The desert can be treacherous at night." "What do you mean?" Jane asked. He went on about the dangers of desert creatures, thorny plants, and uneven terrain, doing his best to dissuade us from venturing out that night. Jane and I listened to him and agreed to stay indoors. We didn't want to upset him. Dinner was ready soon after, and we all enjoyed a meal my mother had prepared. Then we went to bed early that night, given the long day we'd had. Everyone was pretty exhausted. I stayed in the room upstairs that I used as a kid, not too big and not too small, and it had 2 windows on the back wall. Now, this next part is a bit embarrassing, but I was listening to some music with one earbud in while getting ready for bed when I remembered that I had brought my stress relief vape pen with me. I was going through a tough time at the moment and used it to unwind, but it was probably not the best choice. Anyway, I was about to take a puff from it when I heard something outside the window. The desert stretched behind our house, so that's what I was facing. When I looked outside, I noticed that the exterior lights were still on, as someone had forgotten to turn them off before bedtime. As I gazed outside, I spotted a figure peeking from behind one of the cacti right outside the desert. It seemed to be peering in at me. I turned off the light in my room to get a better look, and I truly wish I hadn't. What I saw was an incredibly tall figure. I know I was on the 2nd floor, but this being had to be at least 7 or 8 feet tall. I caught a glimpse of its face, and it resembled the face of a coyote. I thought, why on earth would a coyote be standing on its hind legs, peering behind a cactus like that? And how was it so high off the ground? I took a closer look. I could see sharp teeth in its mouth, and it genuinely looked like this thing was grinning, though coyotes' smiles are often a sign of aggression or anger. But those eyes, those dark amber, soul-piercing eyes, were something I can't forget. Its arm was wrapped around the cactus, and once I noticed that, I realized it didn't have paws or claws. Instead, it had hands like a human, and its arm was strong and muscular. I was terrified, to say the least. The only comparison I could make was to some kind of desert creature straight out of a horror film. As it continued to grin at me, I then saw it wave. I froze. I couldn't move a muscle, even if I wanted to. I think this creature knew that and was savoring every moment of my torment. My sister called my name from the hallway, and then I could move again. I quickly put away my vape pen and went to see what she wanted, still trembling. When she saw me, my sister asked what was wrong. She could tell something was off. I shrugged it off and said, I was just watching some horror movies, because obviously she wouldn't have believed me if I told her what I saw outside. After she went back to bed, I locked all the doors and windows, making sure that thing couldn't get in if it tried, although I doubt anything would have stopped it. I took one last look outside before locking up, and that creature was gone. I tried to distract myself, but I couldn't. As I attempted to sleep, the night grew late, and instead of a restful night, I received something else. In the middle of the night, I heard a deep and spine-chilling howl from the desert, ensuring that I wouldn't be sleeping that night. I never told anyone about this, as no one would believe me. I avoided the desert for the rest of the trip, and couldn't have been happier to leave. What I saw that night will haunt me for the rest of my days, but I'm just relieved it didn't try to enter the house because I'm sure it wouldn't have ended well for anyone. If you live in the southwestern part of Arizona, be cautious, because there's something in the desert that watches you through your window and dwells there in the arid wilderness. This happened. When I was 19, I had a big argument with my mom one night, and I stormed out of the house. I was going to go for a walk, but it was freezing outside and really dark. So I went back inside, grabbed my car keys, and told her I was heading to a nearby diner before storming out yet again and giving the door a nice slam on my way. I jumped into my old and beat-up blue Toyota Corolla and cranked the heat, which made the engine protest loudly. I turned the music up really loudly and pulled out onto the dark streets. I drove to the diner in about 15 minutes and eventually decided I would rather go on a nice late drive to clear my head instead. 20 minutes later, I was on a desolate winding road that had numerous sharp corners as it led to a remote mountain lake with a single-lane bridge crossing it. If that doesn't sound eerie enough, the road was known as Pinecrest Pass, and you can Google this road. It's in the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. This road had a somewhat spooky reputation due to some mysterious disappearances in the past. As I was making my way down Pinecrest Pass, a road I knew quite well from my childhood, I turned a sharp corner. As my headlights swung around, they illuminated an unusual object in the middle of the road. It startled me, but I assumed it was just some discarded roadside debris. As I got closer, I realized it was a baby car seat with a blanket covering the front. I hit my brakes, and my car protested with a loud screech. I sat in my seat, staring at this baby seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I was about to drive off when I heard a noise. I turned down the music, but the sound of my car's engine made it challenging to identify the noise. I cracked my window an inch and listened. It was a baby crying. No, crying is an understatement. This poor thing was wailing. I unbuckled my seatbelt and unlocked my door, reaching for the handle. Then I froze when I thought I saw movement in the nearby bushes, just out of reach of my headlights. I withdrew my hand from the door handle slowly and sat back in my seat, deep in thought. I remembered my mom's advice about not stopping the car at night, especially if you see something that appears to need help. She had always told me to call for professional assistance, as it was not safe for a young woman to handle such situations. But what if it really was a defenseless baby? I couldn't just leave it there. My mind was racing with thoughts until I opened my car door and turned the ignition on. As I did, my car let out a screech, causing whatever it was in the trees to startle and move toward me. I quickly re-entered my car, slammed the door shut, and sped up the road. I managed to make it a few corners back up Pinecrest Pass before pulling out my phone, but still, there was no signal. I raced up to the top and back onto busier streets, then called the police. I informed them about what I had witnessed, and they instructed me to head home immediately, not to stop for any reason, keep my doors locked, and promised to call me the next day, assuring me not to worry. The following morning, the police contacted me, expressing their gratitude for my report. They revealed that a group of individuals had been placing baby seats in the middle of remote roads, covering them with a blanket, which concealed a speaker playing the sounds of distressed children to entice young women out of their cars. Subsequently, they would abduct these women, subjecting them to violence and stealing their cars, leaving them stranded. The police investigated Pinecrest Pass, but the culprits had vanished. They had left in such a hurry that they had forgotten a blue baby blanket with little gray elephants on it, which I had described to the police as covering the baby seat. They commended me for keeping my wits about me and for never getting out of my car late at night, but thinking about it still sends shivers down my spine.